Well, welcome, and welcome to the CRM Canceled and Postponement Practices webinar. My name is Shimo, and I'm with To Synergize. To Synergize is a simple view consulting company, and I'm joined here with Chris George, the Director of Product Education for Simple View. So, hey, Chris.
Good morning, Shimo. Good morning, everybody.
It's really great to be able to present side by side with you today, Chris. This is
Yeah.
the first time that we're able to take something that uh, isn't, maybe something that really requires a little bit of thought about what we're thinking about trying to accomplish, when we're handling the events that need to either cancel or postpone. And so in consulting, I really try to uncover what the CVBs are doing, and we'll be going over a little bit of what we found out in today's webinar. But then to be supported by you, Chris, in terms of product education and then executing as to really giving our CVB guidances, that's all really a treat. So thank you for
Yeah.
being willing to present side by side this morning.
Oh, of course. And this is a really exciting time. I've been with the company for a long time. Obviously, we're going through a lot, all of us all in this together. But it's been really cool that we now have the opportunity working with so many destinations to start looking at, kind of data as a whole and processes as a whole. So really, once this thing really kicked off, we had the opportunity to take a step back and look at hundreds of destinations combined and see how people are tracking their information and really to try to figure out a best practice to something that is a normal occurrence. Things postpone and get canceled all of the time. We just obviously didn't see it at the depth and the rate that we're going through now. But it gives us the opportunity to be able to make adjustments and do some analysis to come out of the other side and give you guys some good information to move forward.
Yeah, and we're going to take a little bit of a look for those of you that haven't had a chance to see this most recently on Destinations International webinar, and I think that was last week, where Ryan George presented some of the consolidated data. But we'll give you some updates because we're updating that data every week. So why don't we start to get going? Oh, I did want to mention that Terry Roberts of the To Synergize team is also with us today, as well as Nicole Mead, and they're in the background. So if you have any technical issues, Nicole's going to help you with that. So please use your discussion board if you're having if you need some help. And then Terry Roberts will be helping to field some of your questions. So please feel free to submit those, and Terry will bring those forward for us. Okay, so what are we talking about? So first of all, just about a week and a half ago, we launched a quick Q survey, which is something that To Synergize team has been doing over the last several years. When there's a question that each of you may want to understand from one another about how you're handling anything, we've done quick Qs on sales training, we've done quick Qs on financial incentives, we've done them on how your CVB and your center work together. But recently, we were asked to kind of take a look at how are the CVBs handling cancellation and postponement practices inside the CRM. So naturally, we're really grateful to have so many of you on this webinar this morning because we want to kind of share the results of that. We had 74 total CVBs participating and all different size destinations. So almost a good representation across the board. We separated out the destinations, large, medium, smaller, and destinations without a center. And we use the gross square feet as a measure of size of that particular destination. And when we collected all of your responses, this probably wasn't surprising, Chris, but we saw 19 different ways of handling many of the COVID-related cancellations and postponements. So it was really a lot of conversations that we had internally with SimpleView to understand what were some of the main threads. So we'll be talking about what those main threads are here. But it really did present the opportunity to that postponed needed some definition. So we'll look forward to discussing that with you today. What we did understand, though, is that we felt we wanted to bring the results back here with Chris to guide us on, what we needed to talk about or educate about the consequences and different impacts that how you handled the cancellation or postponements in your CRM, how it affected maybe some of your reports. So those are some of the things that we hope to accomplish in today's webinar. So one of the things that we asked in the survey was, at this time, which was 2 weeks ago, what is the furthest month out that you had to cancel events? So we're going to see some other data related to this, but at the time, there was a great majority of cancellations that were happening in June and into July. But when we talked about how were you handling these specific cancellation or postponements, we asked you the difference between how you're handling it for citywide conventions as opposed to how you're handling it for hotel meetings. And so here what we saw was not a great difference between how CVBs are handling it between the two types of events, but we are seeing that the majority of you are changing the status to canceled. And then depending upon if that event is really going to be a postponed event, you might be tagging that particular event. Some of you, though, in terms of if it's going to postpone, and again, we'll talk about what does postpone really mean, is that some of you are creating a new lead for the new event dates. Or not, it's not actually a new lead or a new event, it's just that you're creating a new lead for the new dates. Others of you are leaving it indefinite status if it's postponing, and then when new dates are identified, actually changing those dates. And then finally, if the canceled confirms new dates, the lead is then changed to the original date as to not affect your reporting. So you can see how you can kind of get to 19 variations of different practices.
For sure, for sure.
And, Chris and I have been talking about this over the last couple of weeks with the internal team at SimpleView, and we really concluded that the best approach was really to kind of start with what are you trying to accomplish? Because a lot of your comments in the survey really pointed to ways in which you were trying to protect your reporting. Many of you were concerned about what hotels would understand about, or your board would understand about, how you're handling the rebooking of a canceled event and whether or not you were going to have credit again. So is it kind of double counting the original event? So some of you made a lot of comments about how you're preventing that to occur. So when we really backed away from all the ways in which we were handling cancellations and postponements, I think the real important piece was, what are you trying to accomplish? So
sure. Yeah, I think when you're looking at those, and when we get into it a little bit, I think what you're saying is this is a lot scenario based. And then also the other kind of grouping of questions we have to ask is where is the credit going and how should we be reporting off those types of things? So we'll talk more about the different scenarios that lead us down the path of those different options. But then again, that reporting, those are two kind of the big considerations we got to be thinking about when we take these steps.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Great.
Now, the other thing we looked at in the reporting or in the survey uh, is that for self-contained meetings, is your team able to keep up with what's happening with the in-house hotel meetings? And a good majority of you said that you are actively seeking out and understanding whether those events have actually occurred or not, and canceling them in CRM. But this also means that 21% of you are not able to really follow up with all of those meetings that are happening at the hotel, and understandably, because we certainly are sensitive to understanding what's going on in your own CVB and with your sales teams, and especially with your hotel partners. So understandably, we know that you're not able to actively follow up. So what this means is that then we just need you to be aware that in your reporting, perhaps your definite on the books or events that you have on the books didn't really materialize, and it may end up overinflating some reports as you report out to stakeholders. So we just kind of want to keep that in mind.
And I think that's a really good and important thing about all of this. It does come down to that reporting, those types of things. And you can greatly inflate your numbers, or your numbers will look greatly inflated. As we all know, there's just a giant amount of cancellations coming through. And if those still stay as definite bookings on your report a year down the road, you might be looking at those and trying to figure it out further along. It's better to take advantage of this time to right the ship than to look at it, a year or two or down the road and try to explain those numbers. So as important as all of this is getting it right, it's being able to explain the report and being able to explain the numbers that are coming out of the report, once you're questioned about those. So it's great, even if you aren't taking advantage of the cancellation, to Shimo's point, you need to be able to explain why those numbers are there. So hopefully we're getting a little bit of that information here as well.
Thank you. So the next couple of slides is really some aggregate numbers that we have pulled together for the industry. And, just to give you a perspective about how much has changed, and I know each of you are feeling that change. But back in February 1, when we took the snapshot, in reality, we were really in great shape for 2020. 468,000 more room nights on the books compared to the same time last year. And then in March, had a little bit more, 451,000 more room nights on the books versus same time last year. And you can see the distribution over the entire year. And then April 12th, this is just this week, we had 6.7 million fewer room nights on the books versus same time last year. So, this is what has been very dramatic. And just to kind of point out about, if you're not canceling the information or the events, then we may see that some of these numbers might be a little inflated because of that. But the insight is that the majority of lost business is canceled and not postponed. And so we are starting to see cancellations, as you saw in the survey results, into June and July, with maybe a little bit of bookings that got kind of moved here in August. We had almost 550,000 room nights that have been pushed into future dates, which is really creating that compression in the second half of the year. And, it's really been incredible to see this sort of massive shift into this fall. But we know that the fall only has, especially for citywide, some very limited availability. So we're probably not going to see a lot more compression as we go forward. The other insight that we wanted to kind of keep a pulse on is what our lead activity and lead volume as CVBs. And what we saw here in the blue bar is what our 2020 pattern has been. So starting out from beginning the second week of this year, really starting to see the lead volume be higher than previous years. But then as of on March 11th, when the World Health Organization declared the outbreak of coronavirus as a pandemic, then we started to see this decrease in lead volume. What we're wanting to watch for is where does our weekly lead monitor this pattern really kind of bottom out so that we can start to track that recovery. And I know that many of you will be interested in watching this data, so we'll continue to push this out. And then we're also looking at it by the various size of CVB and also reviewing this lead activity by region. So here's where I want to jump off and really start to talk about the actual practice of how you handle an event that is postponing. So I mentioned before that there were 19 different varieties, but there were two really main paths of how you're handling the postponement or cancellation of event. So here's where I'm going to turn it over to Chris to sort of dive into these two main processes.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks, Shimo. Yeah, like you said, 19 different ways we've seen destinations handling this. Some of you are handling the same situation multiple ways internally. So, the big thing about this is trying to establish some processes, and definitely, might need to connect with your CRM analyst so we can understand how you've currently been handling this situation. We'll probably talk a little bit more about this as we go, but we're going to make sure we're righting the ship in some cases, data-wise. And then, like Shimo said, these 19 different variables, they're really broken down into two kind of distinct kind of processes that we've got to talk a little bit about. And so once we, look through these, again, developing some consistency is key. But the first two things we really need to consider are, is the meeting truly postponed? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Then are we just simply moving the block, or do we need to rebid? So now we get into that kind of second part that I mentioned. Scenario is one. The second part talks about credit and reporting. So the instance that we're seeing up here on the screen would be in a situation where we do technically need to go out to rebid. We know that in a lot of these cases, and we saw it on the compression slide that Shimo showed a minute ago, there may not be availability to simply pick up the room block and move it to another date. To say in many of your destinations, take that same block from May and drop it into October. Well, who's to say your convention center is available during those dates, that the same hotel is available during those dates, and that the organization is looking for similar, they have similar needs. Again, maybe the number of people are changing, maybe their requirements are changing during this entire situation. So if that's the case, well, we do need to go out, and collect new responses from our hoteliers and from our service providers. So in those instances, we see here, we take event, call it event ID 123. We would move that to canceled, because those original dates and those original numbers, they were technically canceled. And then we are building a new lead to go out to bid. Now, a little tip on that is you can use the clone feature in CRM to simply cancel the first lead. So you're going to update the status. Then you can clone it if much of the information is similar. That way you're not, copy and pasting or, worried about so much data entry. But either way, you are creating a second lead, because again, now new requirements may be sent to the same hotels, may be sent to new hotels, because again, the same opportunity might not be available. So if that lead then goes out, our hotels and our providers respond, those dates get converted with a meeting planner. Well, now we need to think again about that next step, which is the credit part. Do we need to look at it? And I guess the first thing to consider is this is now a second lead, but where should that lead's credit take place? do we want to backdate this new lead so that the dates line up with the originally booked dates? So let's say lead ID 123 went originally booked in 2019, January of 2019. Well, this new lead goes booked today. Should that credit and that information take place in what April's dates or in this quarter, in this month? Or should we backdate that to the original January dates so it again takes place and it looks like that was actually confirmed then? These are some of the internal processes I think that you need to decide on. But in either case, if we backdate that lead, I should say, it will look like a second lead went booked in January of 2019. So we need to be able to have that discussion. If we pull up last year's numbers and somebody says, well, how did this lead get booked twice? Well, it's on the books twice. We need to be able to have that discussion. Now, the other option is, should it then go take place and go into today's booking? You know, this month, this quarter might be a different sales manager. Should that person be getting an additional credit? So some DMOs look at it like two leads. You went out and did the entire bid process. Again, it might have been a different sales manager. You had to collect the responses. So it just depends on your bookkeeping. Should that lead be counted twice? Should that lead be counted once as a booking in 19 and again as a booking in 2020 in April? Or do I want to push all that stuff back? It all takes place in that January of 2019 window. Hopefully that makes some sense to you
So
guys.
Chris,
Yeah.
so the questions that, the VPs of sales may be having to ask themselves is, if I don't want to receive credit for the postponement of this event, I don't want to double dip per se, then the process A1 is what would be recommended, correct? If that's what they're wanting to accomplish.
That is correct. You know, then in that instance, you will see that a lead went canceled and this one that took place in that original booking window. So the double dip, you know, it will still be counted as two leads. But again, that's the normal situation. One went canceled, one went definite, you know, the second booking. We just need to be able to have that discussion in that case. But you're exactly right. That's how we want to manage that, to make sure that we're understanding what double dip means and we're able to have that discussion.
And
Chris,
then
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure, Terry.
Chris, I'm sorry. I just wanted to, Anna Laura has a question specifically to this process. So I wanted to interrupt here to ask exactly how do you backdate a lead?
No, really good question. And there is a feature in your system called Snapshot. There's also a feature called Status History. Those are features that actually power most of the reporting. The idea with Snapshot is that as the lead changes status, the system takes a snapshot record of the core information at that point. So if a lead goes in the system as a lead, let's take a snapshot saying when it originally went out, these were the numbers associated with it, the number of people, the room block, the EI. Then if it goes definite, well, it takes a snapshot of that at that point in time, because what went booked might not have been what was originally requested. So then as you go, well, that definite record, you can backdate the date. The basic way to explain it is, let's say that it's May 29th, whatever the last day of a month is. You're 5 o'clock in the afternoon and you're walking out the door and a meeting planner calls and says, hey, we're coming. We're definitely coming to your location. Well, tomorrow when you come back to the office, it's now the 1st of June and you go into the system and you mark it as a definite. Well, the snapshot record is going to say that that definite occurrence happened now on June 1st. In that month, that fiscal year might have been different, you know, so from a bookkeeping perspective, you might say, no, that originally, it actually went booked in May. It needs to be in May's numbers. That might be a different fiscal quarter, fiscal year. So the snapshot record allows you to go in and simply edit the definite date to push it back to May so that it is reflected in May's reports rather than June's reports. So what happens with these bookings is as the status changes, you may, and it goes into this example, if you want to go in and cancel some leads today, but they actually went canceled last month, from a bookkeeping and a reporting perspective, your system admins should be looking at that snapshot record. So it takes place in the actual month that status change actually occurred. So I can tell you there's some good documentation in your knowledge base. There's a snapshot document specifically that talks about how that does affect your reporting. So your admin should take a look at that. We also have a webinar, I believe, coming up on Tuesday where we're going really in depth into reporting, and we're going to talk about that snapshot and how it would affect these different reports.
Okay, Chris, I'm going to jump in here with Heather Moreno's question. So Chris, why not move the original lead to be the new dates and in all effect cancel out the new lead 345 by setting it in a status, or in our case, a qualify, where it's not counted or reported? Does that make sense?
It does, and I think you're reading our mind, and that's the other scenario.
Right.
So in that scenario, you may not, again, this is all things you got to discuss, may not need to go out to rebid. In that scenario, we are simply moving the block, over. You call the hotel and say, hey, this group needs to move. They say we're available, and you're just moving it. You don't need to go out to rebid. You don't need to have new information out to your hotels. The requirements haven't changed very substantially. That's
so
a good example.
Let's hold that thought, Chris,
Sure.
because we're going to go over that in 1 second.
You got it.
But one thing I wanted to ask and discuss is that in process A2, where you're not backdating it and you're leaving it in this, whenever you decided to turn that definite, now this event could look like a very short-term booking.
Mm-hmm.
So in process A2, the downside is that this could affect some of your pace reporting, because it now, if you're concerned about booking windows, you just need to be aware that if you weren't to backdate it, then the consequences is that your pace reporting could be off for future periods.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And again, we got to just be able to explain why those things might look that way in a report, and different options for those different scenarios.
Okay. So since Heather wanted to, which is a great suggestion about process B.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
See, Heather's a mind reader.
I know, Heather's a mind reader.
So A, you're seeing what we just described. And now down below, we're seeing, a postponement. So this is a situation where it is similar in meeting structure and requirements. They're basically looking to move those dates within the calendar year. And there isn't that competitive bid process. So we move down into those, we see down there those bullet points. So in that situation, the event goes, again, postponed. The lead can either stay in a definite status. So we see B1, and then those new dates are confirmed. We'll come back to that in 1 second, because we feel like you probably want to see when the originally definite lead, when did it go canceled? So you can change the status to canceled, then back to tentative, because it needs to go back out, or you are now, again, in that tentative process until those dates get confirmed. So again, you take what was a definite lead, change it to a canceled status, because that's what happened. Those dates were canceled. They're not coming, those dates. You then change that lead to tentative because you need to confirm the new dates. So one of those options there. Again, this is one where we're just simply moving the block, but we usually want to see that it was canceled and what date they called and canceled it. Then we go back into the open status before we confirm and close out that definite lead again. So if you want to simply go ahead and just move them. But if you want to see that reflected in your reporting as a cancellation, then we look at process B2. Sorry, Shima.
So, Chris, I think that the advantage of going to B2 is that, and process A, is that in process A and in process B2, you'll actually be able to develop or run a cancellation report. But if you don't do that, if you stay with this B1 process, you'll never produce that cancel report because that event never really canceled. So if you're needing to report to your stakeholders about the COVID-19 impact, then our advice is going to follow this, either go to process A or process B2.
Sure, and I think the really good distinction there is you may want to report off of what was originally booked. then what was rebooked, and be able to describe the variance between those two. Someone might say, why did it go from 1,000 room nights to 500 room nights? Well, we want to be able to say, well, because in May it canceled, then we rebooked with new information on these other dates. So you're exactly right. You need to be able to describe that workflow, I guess.
Hey, Chris, Roberto is asking you specifically, where does the date change occur in process B? In the preferred meeting start end dates, contracted dates, or both?
I would say, well, and that's the key. You're not going out to bid again in this scenario. So what was originally requested technically could stay. You're really looking at what was booked and what was confirmed. Now, I guess to be complete all the way through, and again, this is why this second example is a little bit tricky. If you need to report off those original dates, what were the original dates that they asked for? Well, then you really need to stay with process A. But again, with process B, you would change the requested dates. Most importantly, the new contracted dates, what was booked. So it's one of those, I guess the way to answer that and fumbling a little bit is, do you need to be able to report off of in process B what was originally asked for, or now what was asked for in this second occasion? I know there's a little bit of a trick to that, but that's just it. If you're using the same lead, you're simply editing that. And we do have some lead audit details that you might be able to pull that report out of, but you just need to consider what is actually in that lead and what's going to pull out of the report. But again, since you're not going out to bid again, do the requested dates matter? It's up to you guys. The confirmed dates are what matter because you want to know what was booked and actually happened on that lead.
Thank you, Chris. I got a perfecto from Roberto, who says
Right.
that he was with you. Amanda is wanting to just confirm something. So in process B, Chris, do you suggest that they are keeping the canceled status in the history field in the lead if it goes definite for a second time?
Yeah, and the system does that. So that's one of the cool things about the status changes is you have a section on your leads, you have your lead audit details, and we're able to pull reports off of that. So really, again, think about snapshot right along with these status changes. It's taken just a record of what it was at that point in time. So with process B, changing the lead, you would see the original booking, you would see what those numbers were when it was canceled, back out, and then what was booked then again. So you could report off of those numbers.
Okay, so Tanya wants to know then if she isn't currently using pickup dates,
Okay.
right? Could we use that section for the new dates?
So I'm going to suggest we stick with these. Now we get outside of, these variables. Pickup, it would throw your reporting off. Pickup is the numbers post-event that actually took place. So if we started entering information into the pickup field, well, you're gonna skew your reports pretty drastically. That is not the mechanism for that. So I would avoid using pickup for anything other than what it was built for, which is to enter those numbers post-event, the actualized numbers. We did consider all of the options. Like I said, Chima said like 19 different variables. I'm sure that was one of them that was in there somewhere, but that just really skews the reports and really affects the system in some more dramatic ways.
So you guys up for a couple more questions?
I'm ready.
All right. So let me get Tim up here. So Tim, okay, hold on, because now I've got to go back to a few places in the doc here.
Terry,
right.
while you're doing that, I'd like to just provide some advice in that over the last, couple of years, or especially over this last year, as part of our consulting, I've talked to probably over 75 hotel general managers and DOSMs. And so it's really given me a good perspective to advise that it's so important the way in which you choose to handle how your numbers, and production are reflected in the reports that you share. So I think that one of the things that we need to make sure we do is have everything in writing, and that you're vetting these through, you know, for sure internally, but to make sure that you have all of these processes of what you decide, but based upon the results you're looking to achieve in writing. And some of you have done a good job of that because you've shared that with me. And I would just encourage that as a fundamental practice.
For sure. That's great.
Okay, so let me ask a couple of questions. Let's address Tim's question first. So at one point, was the suggestion to change the dates if the new date is in 2020? I'm sorry, if the original date was in 2020 and the new lead dates are in 2021, is it a new lead?
It's scenario based. It kind of, again, depends on your bookkeeping, and does it need to go out to bid again? Are we collecting new responses again? I think if I'm understanding the question, it depends on the scenario of that lead.
And I think that the guidance that we're trying to provide under the definition of postponed is that if it is the same meeting occurrence and it's going to move and it's just moving until later in the year, it's the same meeting. Where the gray area starts to occur is if that meeting, it's the same meeting and it moves into the first quarter because you didn't have space, right, in the fourth quarter. And in order to keep the business in your destination, you've agreed with the planner that yes, the first quarter, and that's where you're going to move. If it's the same meeting, then I think it's a postponement, even though it says here dates later in the calendar year. But again, these are scenarios that you will need to vet internally and make sure that you can, that your integrity is in place when it comes to reporting and taking credit for that particular booking or not taking credit for that particular postponed event. Now, many of you are dealing with postponements that might occur 2-3 years down the road. And I would argue at that point, it's not the same meeting, and that it is a new meeting where you already have some written policies as it relates to when you take credit in the year for the year versus if it moves to another year. So I think that when it moves 2-3 years down the road, it is no longer the same meeting that it is a new booking.
That makes sense to me, yeah.
All right, so a few more. Michelle is, our friend Michelle in Newport's asking about that they have actually taken canceled room nights off our production. So canceling and rebooking will give us new definite numbers come next fiscal year, a positive. Have other DMOs taken the canceled numbers off this year's production? And what's your thought about that process?
So, Chris, I think what Michelle is saying is that they're taking the cancellation, and then they might be going down process A, and then they're booking it again, or creating a new lead, which is new production. And I would just caution our community about how you take credit, because when you start talking about production, you're talking about sales managers' credit for a new booking. So I think that my conversation about treating where is that event occurring, like is it just occurring later in the year? You want to really be able to keep the integrity of your team in place. And because I can tell you your counterparts in the hotel community are not getting that kind of credit and are not getting those additional production numbers for an event that may postpone into later parts of the year. So again, I can't underscore enough about how important it is to have credibility, to maintain your credibility in terms of team production through these processes.
That's great. I think this is straightforward for Chris. Chris, Deborah's asking about using both processes. So like using process A when they need to rebid and process B for using the same hotel but different dates.
I think you're right on track. You know, that's the tricky one from a training perspective. It again depends on the scenario. Really, the credit part, like Shima was talking about, when we look at, you know, usually that definite, that lead or that date change, the last, I guess, row over there on the right hand side, that's the consideration.
Okay.
Both processes do make sense. Again, is it truly postponed, or do we need to rebid A or B? And then then it comes down to the credit and the reporting and like what month, what quarter bucket should those things fall in, and should the credit go to a different sales manager, you know, those types of things. So I'd be using both of these processes, and then again, the back end of that is the discussion piece. I guess you just need to have internally.
Great. Chris, Juliet would like to know, so they've added some new UDF fields to collect original meeting dates while mostly using process B. Will that be sufficient?
Well, I mean, that will stay square. Now you just need to consider your reporting. You know, UDFs, fields that you add, UDFs are user defined fields. Your system admins can add as many new fields onto the lead form as you might like. So it sounds like in this example, they added in some new fields to track the original dates. Those will stay there, they'll work. You just need to be considerate of that when you're building a report. Just, I guess, take that all the way through. The core reports in your CRM system that came at canned, they would not be taking those numbers into account. They would not include those in any type of a report. So you would just need to work with your CRM analyst to get reports built that include those numbers in the display, or, you know, to be able to search or reference those fields.
Okay. Chris, James Hughes wants to know, is it possible to copy over all, oh, hold on, somebody asked something and then now James flew up out of my sight. Is it possible to copy over all the information when cloning a canceled lead? Example, are you pulling over the traces, the notes, the contracts, everything?
And I'd have to double check. It's a good question, James. I do not believe that all of those things get pulled over all the way. Now that's a discussion for your analysts. I'm not sure if there's anything that we can do off of that, but it is something that we should be considering. But that's definitely something we can take back to the shop. I totally understand what you're saying. If it is that now the same meeting, you want to see those original notes, the original contracts, and all of those things in the new one. And right now, when you clone, I'm pretty sure it doesn't copy all that stuff over. So we would definitely have to work with your analyst, see if there's a possibility to do something about that now. But I can tell you, we'll take this back to the shop with Billy and the rest of the product team to see if there's, you know, some considerations we can make. Now I can say this with very, you know, with quite a bit of confidence. We do have a new version of the system in process. These are things we are definitely considering as we're building the new CRM, i.e. the DMS. And when we get into the lead process, we're going to look at how we handle postponements, cancellations, overflow bookings, all of these things. So there will be a lot more coming in the future.
Okay, I did want to note that Michelle, I think Michelle left the meeting, but she also wanted to just note for anyone who's listening that they took it off this year, so it isn't they aren't receiving double credit. All right, boy, you guys are eliciting a lot of questions here. So let me just continue down and move on to Roxanne. So Roxanne, Chris is commenting that they will be marking all events and canceled just because that is the best way to track for our smaller DMO. If they use canceled as the status and use the COVID health concerns as the lost code, will that track, or do they have to change the status to lost in order for the lost code to track?
It doesn't. Now there's you know, one big thing that jumped out with me at that, you can definitely pull the lost code into a canceled report. We just have to look at that, you know, consider that when building out the report. Now, from a previous webinar, we just need to make sure we understand the difference again between a lost and a canceled booking. And I think you're on track with it, but just so we're clear, lost means it was a never booked in your destination. They were never coming. They chose another city. They decided not to hold the event. So it becomes lost, and then those lost codes probably naturally make sense. Now with a canceled, you can also put in that lost code. Why did they cancel? It might have been because of COVID. It might have been because of an act of God, another natural disaster, whatever, you know, things happen. Then you can consider those and include those into a canceled report. So the status is canceled and the code is COVID.
Okay, great. I'm going to go back to Tim and just see if I can unmute you, Tim. I'm not sure if you're set up with a microphone, but if you are, you have actually the ability to talk to Chris, because I know you wanted just a little bit further clarification.
Muted.
Hey, Tim.
Hi. Hi, Chris.
How's it
Yeah,
going?
so my question, because I was looking at process B2 and snapshots
Okay.
throw me off to begin with. But so if you change a lead from definite, then make it canceled and make it tentative, and then you make it definite again, does each one of those snapshots show up on which month you did it in? Or does it throw off any of your reports from before?
Well, I guess it will be reflected today. So if you get canceled and then tentative, it's going to show those actions took place today.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Am I answering your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. And if you need to change those, then, you know, we could take a look at doing that.
Got it.
All right. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks.
And one thing about the process B2, Chris, going from canceled to tentative, that is a system admin function, correct?
Really, yeah, all of the updating of dates is a system admin feature. That is correct. Yeah, so some of you may not even see the snapshot tab because you don't have access to it. So for most of you, you can't edit those. And the reason behind that is technically you can keep changing the date of a lead to definite every month and get credit for it every month when you pull that report. So we do limit some of these things so your admins, you know, they're keeping power of all this stuff.
Great. Hey, you guys, Allison wants to comment that they are backdating the tentative date and the definite date using the B2 process.
Okay, definitely works. Yeah, just where should those take place? Where should, you know, when, what month, what quarter should those actions fall in underneath your reporting? That's great.
And, you know, I do think, Terry, excuse me, you know, the process of B2 is probably the most accurate process. Even though it's changing status, because you'll be able to track every step of the way, and then combined with Allison's comment that they're backdating the tentative and they're backdating the definite in order to make sure that from a reporting standpoint that they're not skewing their booking pace picture at the same time. So by backdating it, yes, that's probably the most thorough process.
Shout out, Allison. All right. James Hughes, Chris just wants to give a little bit more feedback in suggesting that the user reassignment tools need to be a little bit more robust. Filters, arrival date, peak, requested, etc.
Sure. Yeah, and you know that is the admin tool, and there's lots of variables with that one too. Your analyst can take care of those things. Yeah, but I can definitely see, you know, an improvement on the admin side, so you can do those things yourselves.
All right, questions are slowing down, so that's a good. We're flattening the curve.
All right.
That's a good sign.
It's working.
I know. I can't decide if COVID humor is appropriate or not. So if I've offended anyone, I apologize.
We're all in it together, right?
Oh, no kidding. Okay, Dasha has a totally different question. She is saying, okay, Dasha, hold on just a second. So she is saying that they are working with EICs a lot, and we just noticed that overnight visitors are being carried over in the sports EIC and not in the MNC. Is it a question for Chris? Or should she just work offline on this, Chris?
So I think that's a question for your analyst. And you know, many of these, we get into your unique systems and processes and those types of things. You know, we can only speak on pretty general terms without looking at your system and your data. So I would definitely reach out to your analyst.
All right. Hey, and Jason Altman, we miss you too. How's that? I'd love to be able to see your smiling face right now. Our friend Tyler has a question. So Tyler Orgrid would like to know, if we are backdating in order to not take credit, what happens if the backdate to the original lead date is within the same year? Wouldn't that credit show up twice within the year?
I'm sorry, I might need you to repeat that one for me if you could,
Okay.
Terry.
Let me just see. I'm going to try to unmute Tyler. I had a decent amount of luck with Tim. Hey, Tyler,
Hey, it looks like I'm on.
you're on.
Hey, so we were going along these same processes, and the thought was by backdating the definite date to the original definite status date, and in the lead as well, I guess, so that we wouldn't be showing that production within the current time period. So we wouldn't be taking credit twice. That same theory, let's just say something booked 2 months ago, they canceled, and then a month from now, which is all within the same year, they rebooked. If I'm backdating that status date to the original date, I'm still within the same year. And wouldn't that show credit, the current annual credit, current annual production as a double credit?
So, Chris, let me see if I can give a stab at this. So, your first lead, 1, 2, 3, you're actually canceling that, correct?
Yes.
And then you're creating a new tentative, whether it's process A or B, but it's a tentative status. And then you're backdating that to the original date,
Yes.
correct? So
Yes.
what would show is that you would have perhaps 2 tentatives, right, in 1 year, but you wouldn't be counting the definite room nights twice because one got canceled completely out. So you wouldn't be double counting on the room nights, but you, from a lead count, it may get reflected as a new 2 leads.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
And
sounds right to me.
For
Great.
many of you, that may not be a significant issue because of how you're reporting and how you're crediting. But Tyler, because you're saying that it's all occurring in 1 year, then that's a possibility. And we kind of felt like in this whole scheme of things, that would be the less impact.
Okay. Thanks.
So I don't know if we've answered all their questions or if they're just tired.
They're over it. It's fair.
That their head-
You've either done a great job of answering all their questions or they're just tired. But I wanted to reconfirm that everyone will receive both a copy of these slides, because we've been getting that a lot, and that Nicole will also be sending you a copy of this recording. So just give us a little time to get that processed and over to Michelle, and the recording to be transcribed, and then we'll be getting that out to you all so that you can, again, as she said, sit down and process this with your team.
So I want to wrap up by saying that there are really 4 questions you should be asking yourself, which will drive which process that you want to adopt for your particular CVB. And so in summary, the first question is really, is the meeting just postponing? It's all similar and you're just changing the dates and it's very little impact, right? So that's the first question. Is it just postponing and everything's the same about it? So in that case, Chris, they're going down process B, correct?
Yeah, sounds good.
So the second question that you could ask yourself is, do I want to prevent any double credit? So in that scenario, if that's what you're trying to accomplish, then you need to backdate, right? If you're going down process A, it has to be this A1 in order to not double count the definite twice or definite room nights twice. And I suppose also in B2, correct?
Correct. Yeah, you got it.
if you want to take new credit, then you would go through process A2 if you're wanting to get new credit, and it's fine with you that you recognize that it's going to change your PACE reporting. So that is A2, and we think that that's probably the lesser of all, in terms of really being able to track things really well. But that's just a question you should ask if you want new credit. And then if you want to make sure you have a canceled report that you're always attributing to what's going on today in terms of COVID, then the process is either A or B2, because B1 is the only process here that you're not actually canceling, so you would never show up on a canceled report. How'd I do, Chris?
I think you nailed it right on the head.
So I hope that gives you all these processes are really driven by what you need to accomplish, and you need to kind of think that through first and make that what you need to be fundamentally, so that you can make your proper choices so that your reporting is correct for your particular situation. So again, Terry and Nicole, thank you so much for your support. And Chris, it's really great to co-host a webinar with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Shimo, and thanks everyone. Great to, I guess, kind of see you.
All right.
We got just a very few last questions in, and what I'm going to do is when I get the question report from Nicole, Chris, since there's just a couple and they're pretty specific, I will shoot them over to their, would you want me to send them to you or shoot them directly to their CRM analysts?
You can shoot them over to me. I might be able to, get a quick answer.
Okay,
and
great.
in certain cases, I might come over to their analyst as well. If I can't answer it, then you're hearing back from your analyst.
It's just a couple, so I just wanted to, because they got cut off kind of at the end, so I didn't want to ignore them. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, everyone.